The church bells had just fallen silent when the oak coffin was slowly lowered into the ground, and at that exact moment the silver-haired woman in a black dress froze as the man beside her whispered, "Clara." You know, there were things he never told the truth about. The words cut through the solemn silence like a knife. All her life, Clara Whitmore had believed in a marriage without secrets. But today, amid the incense smoke and tear-streaked faces, she suddenly realized she had never truly known the man lying in that coffin. Edward Whitmore had died of a sudden heart attack, leaving behind a gaping void and a chain of unanswered questions. They had been together for 24 years, long enough for Clara to believe there was nothing hidden between them. Yet during the funeral, among the unfamiliar mourners, she noticed a few vaguely recognizable faces. Men in gray suits standing beneath the trees, keeping their distance, simply watching. Their eyes were cold and probing, as if waiting for the right moment to make their move. After the ceremony, Clara sat alone in the quiet living room. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over their wedding photo on the wall, where Edward smiled with pride, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. The stillness was broken by a knock at the door. A middle-aged man entered wearing a brown suit and holding a thick envelope. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Daniel Price, Mr. Edward's personal attorney," he said in a calm, steady voice, though his eyes betrayed hesitation. "Before his passing, he left something for you that must be delivered immediately after the funeral." He opened his briefcase and placed a small wooden box before her, its lid engraved with 2 letters. M.W. Clara slowly lifted the lid. Inside was an old silver key with a small grape-shaped charm and a letter written in the familiar, slanted handwriting she knew so well. The key felt cold and heavy, as if it carried the breath of the past. Her hands trembled as she opened the letter and read the first line. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means I am gone. There is something I never told you, a place I once swore I would never return to, yet I did because of you." At the bottom was an address, Glenhaven Vineyard, Sonoma Valley, California. A vineyard Clara looked up astonished. Edward never said he owned a place in California. The lawyer nodded. In fact, this property was transferred to your name only after his passing. He instructed me to keep it strictly confidential. According to the records, it's an old Whitmore family estate, the place where Mr. Edward grew up before moving to New York. He hesitated for a moment. "You should also know his brothers Thomas and Victor contacted me this morning. They intend to contest your inheritance rights. Apparently, the land's value has risen sharply since an oil deposit was discovered nearby." Clara sat motionless. Oil, a vineyard, a secret address. None of it made sense. Edward was an environmental engineer, not a businessman. He had always respected nature and despised exploitation. Why would he buy back his family's vineyard, the place he had sworn never to return to? And why had he hidden it from her? When the lawyer left, Clara remained seated in the vast, quiet room, staring at the silver key gleaming in her hand. It felt like both a betrayal and an invitation. A call from the past, from the man she thought she knew better than anyone. Outside, the wind rattled the curtains and dry leaves whispered across the porch. For the first time since the funeral, her heart beat faster. Not from grief, but from a strange mixture of curiosity and fear. That night, after everyone had gone, Clara sat at Edward's old desk and turned on his laptop. The familiar password screen appeared, followed by a folder that automatically opened labeled Glenhaven. Inside was only one file, a 2-minute video. The screen flickered to life, revealing Edward's face, healthy, smiling gently. "If you're watching this, Clara, it means I'm gone," he began. "I'm sorry for making you promise something I couldn't keep myself. Glenhaven isn't just where I grew up. It's a wound, a memory I wanted to forget but couldn't. I bought it back 3 years ago. I've turned it into something I believe you'll love." Clara's fingers brushed the screen as tears rolled down her cheeks. In the video, Edward looked up, his eyes calm in a way she had rarely seen. "I know you'll go there, and when you do, you'll understand why I chose to remain silent." The video ended, leaving only darkness and her uneven breathing. 3 days later, Clara drove north, leaving behind the noisy streets of New York and heading towards Sonoma Valley, where the air was dry and sweet with the scent of ripe grapes. The closer she got to Glenhaven, the emptier the road became, lined with endless rows of vines that seemed to guide her into another world. When she finally stopped before a large wooden gate, the sign read, "Whitmore Vineyard Established, 1886, gleaming under the sun." The gate was locked, but the silver key fit perfectly. As the latch clicked open, Clara felt as if she had just unlocked another life, a hidden chapter Edward had lived, loved, and concealed. Beyond that gate, among the rolling hills of grapevines and a white house shining in the afternoon light, lay everything he had left behind, a legacy, a confession, and a secret she was not yet ready to face. But what Clara did not know was that 3 men were already on their way there. They carried the Whitmore name, and they were coming not to mourn the dead, but to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. The morning sun in Sonoma Valley cast a golden glow over the rolling hills. Rows of ripe grapes stretched endlessly like a green carpet glistening with dew. Clara stopped her car before the tall wooden gate, her heart fluttering between excitement and fear. She took a deep breath and slid the silver key into the lock. The dry click echoed sharply in the still air. The gate creaked open, revealing a world she had never imagined. A white 2-story house stood at the heart of the vast vineyard. Everything was neat and vibrant, alive with care and precision. This was no abandoned property, but a well-tended estate. Lavender pots hung from the balcony, and in the courtyard stood a bronze statue of an eagle with its wings outstretched. Clara stepped up the porch steps, her heart racing strangely fast. The front door was ajar, and when she pushed it open, the hinges squealed, as if they had been waiting for this very moment. The air inside carried the scent of fresh wood and sweet wine. The walls of the living room were lined with paintings, vineyard hills, sunsets, and particularly sketches of a woman's hand holding a brush. In the corner by a sunlit window sat a desk with a bouquet of dried flowers and a note scribbled in haste. "For you." Beneath it lay a brown leather journal, Edward's diary. Clara opened it, and the first line made her breath catch. "I came back here. Clara, to the place I swore I'd never return. But with every harvest, I remembered your eyes when you said, if I could, I'd live among the scent of wine and the light of California. I built this place for you." Overwhelmed, she barely noticed the sound of footsteps on the porch until a husky female voice called out. Mrs. Whitmore Clara turned to see a woman with graying hair wearing a linen shirt and worn jeans. Her gaze was warm but cautious. "I'm Elena Morales, the manager of Glenhaven Vineyard. Mr. Edward hired me 3 years ago to take care of this place." Her voice carried a quiet sadness. "He used to come here on weekends, always alone. He worked late into the night, replanting every vine, handpicking each variety. He said that once this vineyard was complete, his wife would understand everything." Clara felt her chest tighten. "He never told me anything about this place." Elena nodded gently as if she had expected that. "I think he was afraid you'd see what he couldn't bear to remember." "What do you mean?" Clara asked. But Elena didn't answer. Instead, she led her along a stone path between the grape rows. The sun had risen high, and the scent of ripe grapes drifted through the warm air. Elena brought Clara to a small building at the back, its wooden door carved with the word studio. Inside, natural light flooded through the large glass windows. In the center stood an easel covered with a white cloth. Elena pulled the cloth away, revealing an unfinished painting. A woman stood in a vineyard, her face turned slightly to the side, silver hair glowing under the sunlight. There was no mistaking it. It was Clara. "He painted you," Elena said softly. "For the past 3 years, every time he came here, he worked on this. He said he wanted to give you a place that belonged only to the two of you." Clara's hand trembled as she touched the painting. "He was that sick," Elena nodded. "He knew he didn't have much time, but he worked every day hiding his treatment from me. He said if he didn't finish Glenhaven, he couldn't rest in peace." As Clara stood lost in emotion, the sound of engines echoed from outside. Elena peered through the window, her face tensing. Not staff cars, luxury ones, 2 of them. Clara stepped out onto the porch. A black SUV stopped before the gate. 3 men in dark suits emerged. The one leading them had a stern face, silver hair slicked back and eyes cold as steel. Clara recognized him instantly, Thomas Whitmore Edwards' older brother. Behind him was Victor, the quiet younger brother, and a 3rd man carrying a briefcase. Clara Thomas said in a tone that was both cordial and condescending, "We heard you arrived. That saves us the trouble of sending an official notice." Notice, Clara asked, her voice rasping. Thomas smiled and pulled out a stack of papers. "According to legal records, ownership of Glenhaven is under dispute. My brother was not of sound mind when he repurchased this estate. This property belongs to the family, not to a grieving widow clinging to memories." The words sliced through her like a blade. Clara's face flushed, her heart pounding. "You're insulting my husband. No, I'm protecting his reputation. My brother was always weak, ruled by emotion, and you knew how to use that." Elena stepped forward, her hands clenched. "Mr. Edward was perfectly sound. I witnessed every document, every signature." Thomas glanced at her and smirked. "A hired hand is not a legal witness." Clara gripped the key in her hand, her voice calm but firm. "If you truly believe I deceived him, let the court decide. But before you do, remember, Edward prepared for everything. He never did anything halfway." Thomas faltered for just a moment. Something in her eyes unsettled him, a quiet certainty that hinted at more than grief. "We'll be back," he said flatly. "Soon. And when we do, you'll understand that Glenhaven isn't yours." When their cars disappeared beyond the bend, Clara stood still, holding Edward's journal tightly against her chest. The ache inside her was slowly shifting into something else, a small flame beginning to burn. Elena came closer, her voice low. "You shouldn't be afraid. He once told me, if that day ever comes, Clara will know what to do." Clara lifted her gaze, sunlight glinting through the vines, making her eyes shimmer like glass. She whispered, "Then it's time I learn how to do exactly that." In the distance, the wind swept through the vineyard, carrying the sweet scent of soil and the faint aroma of wine lingering in the old oak barrels. A new beginning filled with secrets and unspoken promises was waiting for her beyond those endless rows of vines. The evening wind swept through the vineyard, shimmering in the golden light of sunset. Clara sat alone in the vast living room, Edward's journal open on the table. Beside it rested a half-finished glass of red wine glowing like blood beneath the lamp. From afar came the faint hum of cicadas, mixed with the earthy scent of soil, a feeling both familiar and strange. On the table lay a small silver USB drive, silent and cold, the one she had just found hidden behind a painting in the library. She took a deep breath and plugged it into the computer. The screen lit up. Edward's face appeared healthy and smiling, his eyes bright as they had been in their younger days. "If you're watching this, it means I'm no longer with you." His voice was warm and steady. "I'm sorry for leaving you in doubt. Glenhaven is both the place I feared the most and the place I loved the most. I once hated it for the losses it reminded me of, but I realized that only by returning could I truly be free." Edward paused, then looked directly into the camera. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with a hereditary heart condition. The doctors said I had only a few years left, maybe less. I chose to keep it from you because I didn't want your days filled with fear. I wanted you to remember me in the sunlight, not through the smell of medicine and the sound of heart monitors. Clara's hands trembled, her fingers icy cold. A wave of emotion surged within her, grief tangled with anger. He had taken away her chance to stand by his side in his final moments, replacing it with silence, disguised as protection. "How could you do this to me, Edward?" she whispered, as tears streamed down her face. Yet buried in her pain was a glimmer of something else. He had loved her so deeply that he had chosen to shield her from his decline. On the screen, Edward bowed his head, his voice softening. "I didn't buy Glenhaven for its land or its wine. I bought it to create a place meant only for you. Every brick, every row of vines bears your name. If they come to claim it, remember they only want what lies beneath the ground. What's above the light, the wind, the scent of wine, all of it belongs to you." The screen faded to black. Clara sat motionless, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Through the window, she saw headlights flicker across the vines. Someone was coming. The door swung open and Elena rushed in, her face tense. "Mrs. Clara, there are people at the gate. It's Thomas and Victor." Clara gripped the armrest, then rose slowly. "Let them in." Elena hesitated. "Are you sure?" Clara nodded, her eyes resolute. "If they want to fight, I want to hear what they have to say." Moments later, the two men entered, bringing with them the chill of night and the sharp smell of cigarette smoke. Thomas, with his silver hair and hard expression, sat on the sofa as if he owned the place. Behind him stood Victor, quiet and calculating. "We came to settle this." Clara Thomas began his tone, calm but laced with implication. "No one wants to turn family matters into a battleground." Family Clara gave a bitter smile. "I was never considered part of your family." Thomas shrugged with feigned regret. Edward was a dreamer. He never understood the real world. He thought he could keep this place just to grow grapes and watch sunsets, while beneath it lies a fortune. Clara narrowed her eyes. "A fortune!" Victor pulled out a folded document and placed it on the table. "Did you know that 18 months ago this area was surveyed and found to have significant oil reserves? The land value has increased tenfold. Edward refused to sell, costing the family millions. We're only trying to correct his mistake." Clara was silent for a moment before replying evenly. "He knew about it, but Edward didn't need money. He needed peace." Thomas scoffed. "Peace doesn't pay bills." "Clara, and I'm sure you understand that when the court sees he purchased this estate after being diagnosed with a heart condition, they'll question his mental capacity. You're saying my husband was insane." Clara's voice tightened. Thomas raised his hand slightly. "Not insane, just impaired. If you're wise, you'll take our offer transfer part of the property, and we'll make sure you receive full profit from the oil." The air in the room thickened. Clara stared straight into his eyes. "You're here for the oil, not for Edward. You never cared about him. You never even visited while he was alive. Don't pretend to mourn him now." Victor leaned forward. "Watch your words. This is a legal matter." Clara's lips curled into a cold smile. I have every document proving Edward was fully competent when he purchased Glenhaven, and I have a witness, Mrs. Morales, who was present for every transaction." Elena stepped forward and placed a file on the table. "Here are notarized copies along with video evidence of the signing." "Would you like to see them?" Thomas froze, then stood abruptly. "You're digging your own grave, Clara. You have no idea who you're up against." Clara remained calm. "I know exactly who I'm up against. The same people who drove my husband away from his family for 30 years. Thomas glared at her, his eyes dark. "This isn't over." He turned sharply, signaling Victor. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving behind the stench of smoke and tension. Elena exhaled shakily. "What do you think they'll do what they always do?" Clara said coldly. "Use money and the law to take what they want." But Edward anticipated this. He was always one step ahead. She sat down and replayed the video. Edward's face appeared once more, his smile calm and steady. "If they come, don't be afraid, Clara. I left everything you'll need in the bottom drawer of the desk in the west room." Clara rose and went straight there. When she opened the drawer, she found a thick envelope containing a neatly typed file titled Glenhaven Ownership and Proof of Legitimacy. At the bottom lay a handwritten note. "They will come, but you have the truth, and the truth always wins." For the first time since the funeral, she smiled not a gentle smile, but one born of resolve. It was the smile of a woman who knew she was stepping into battle. A battle not just to protect a piece of land, but to guard the soul of the man she loved. That night, the wind swept fiercely through the rows of vines outside, carrying with it the damp scent of earth and the lingering aroma of aged wine blending together like a dark premonition. Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the upstairs window, watching the moonlight spill over the pale gold valley, her hand still clutching the envelope Edward had left behind. All her life, she had lived peacefully, believing happiness was simple to love and be loved in return. But now, within this estate, happiness had taken on another form, hidden beneath secret's betrayal, and a battle that had yet to begin. As the room dimmed around her, Clara opened Edward's old notebook once more. A folded paper slipped out, attached to a faded photograph Edward as a young man, standing in the vineyard, and behind him an older man with a stern gaze, his father. On the back of the photograph, in familiar handwriting, were the words, "Sonoma, autumn of '88. The last time I was here." She read the line over and over, feeling the weight of long suppressed pain in every word. The next morning, she and Elena walked to the northern fields. A thin layer of mist hung low, the ground damp, and the breeze carried the sweet scent of ripened grapes. "He planted all of these himself," Elena said, her eyes tracing the perfectly even rows. "He told me only old soil can preserve the soul of wine." Clara smiled faintly, then asked, "Do you know why Edward hated coming back here?" Elena hesitated, partly because of his father and partly because of his brothers. Clara stopped walking. "I suppose he was deeply hurt." Elena nodded. "They always belittled him. When Edward was 18, he wanted to keep the land for grapes, but his father and brothers sold most of it to an oil company. He called them men who knew the price of everything but the value of nothing." Clara gazed into the distance. On the hill, sunlight streamed through the vines, making the dew drops sparkle like crystal. Her chest grew heavy. The man she loved had once been forced to walk away from his own blood to rebuild his life, and now, after his death, they had come back to take the last thing he left behind. That afternoon, when Clara returned to the main house, she decided to open the heavy wooden door at the end of the hall, the one Edward had once said, "Don't go in unless I tell you to. The lock was rusty but firm. When she turned the key, a cold gust swept out. The small room was dark, lit only by a single desk lamp. On the table sat a wooden box engraved with the initials EW, inside of which lay an old journal belonging to Edward's mother, Eleanor Whitmore. Clara opened the first page, the paper yellowed with age. Today, Edward cried again. His father beat him for saying he didn't want to drill for oil. He said, "This land is for grapes, not for machines. I know that when I am gone, he will leave this place forever." The handwriting trembled, stained with old tears. Clara felt as though someone were squeezing her heart. She turned a few more pages. Thomas and Victor always tried to make Edward feel small. They said he was weak and not fit for business, but I can see that he's the only one who truly understands the value of this land. At that moment, Clara understood everything. Glenhaven wasn't just a place of memory, it was an old battleground one Edward had once lost, and one she now had to finish on his behalf. That night, she replayed the part of Edward's video she hadn't yet watched. His voice filled the room deep and warm. "Clara, I know they'll come. I left a safe in the wine cellar. Inside are documents about Thomas and Victor's dealings, things they never wanted anyone to see. I didn't keep them to blackmail them, but to protect you. If they push you, use the truth." Clara shot to her feet, her heart racing. Grabbing a flashlight, she went down to the cellar. The beam of light swept across rows of towering oak barrels, the air thick with the scent of old wine. In the far corner, she noticed a floorboard slightly out of place. Beneath the dust lay a small safe. What was the password? She remembered Edward's words. "The truth lies in the light." She tried the numbers written on a slip of paper tucked in the journal, their wedding date, May 1958. A sharp click sounded and the safe opened. Inside was a thick stack of documents, photographs, wire transfers, forged contracts, all bearing the names Thomas Whitmore and Victor Whitmore. Edward had collected evidence of stock manipulation, money laundering, and fake oil contracts. Clara felt as if she were holding a bomb in her hands. These papers could save her or ignite a war without end. As she read, the distant rumble of car engines echoed through the night. Headlights flashed across the cellar window. Elena rushed down, whispering urgently, "Mrs. Clara, they're back, with some strange men carrying hunting rifles. They said they're here to inspect the land." Clara closed the safe, locked it carefully, and stood tall. "Call the police." "Do you think they'll listen?" Elena's voice trembled. "They don't have to listen," Clara replied calmly. "We just need proof they were here." She climbed the stairs, the golden light from the hallway illuminating her determined face. As the front door burst open, Thomas stepped inside, followed by two burly men. Clara Thomas said smoothly, "We have the legal right to inspect the property under inheritance law. No need to panic." Clara looked him straight in the eye, her voice cold and steady. "This is my legal property. Every step you take here is being recorded. I've already called the police." For a moment, hesitation flickered across Thomas's face. Then he gave a faint smile. "The police can't protect this land forever. You're only delaying the inevitable." Clara said nothing. She stood firm, her eyes unwavering. Behind them, the flashing red and blue lights of police cars cut through the darkness on the road to Glenhaven. The sound of sirens shattered the tense silence. Thomas slowly stepped back. "Fine. I don't want a scene tonight. But remember this, Clara, the law doesn't always protect the weak. Sometimes it favors those who know how to use it." Fortunately, Clara replied softly, "I had a husband who understood the law better than anyone." The door closed behind them. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the scent of ripe grapes and the faint trace of wine. Clara looked toward the hills, her eyes glinting with fierce determination. She knew the battle had only just begun, and this time she would fight not only to protect Glenhaven for Edward, but for herself. The next morning, a thin layer of mist blanketed the skies over Sonoma. The first light of day glimmered faintly through the rows of vines. Clara woke early, brewed her coffee, and sat on the front porch, watching the valley awaken. From afar came the fading sound of an engine, the night patrol car driving away, leaving behind a quiet dirt road. Everything felt calm, eerily calm, as if nothing had happened. But Clara knew that peace was only temporary. Elena appeared holding the morning newspaper. "You should see this," she said softly. The front page read, "Whitmore Corporation under financial fraud investigation." Below the headline was a photo of Thomas shaking hands with a politician. Clara stared at the words, her chest tightening. Edward had been right. He hadn't kept the evidence just to protect her, but to expose the truth when the time came. After breakfast, Clara went down to the wine cellar again. In the dim light, she carefully reviewed the documents Edward had collected. Among the files, she discovered a small sealed envelope labeled, "For my wife if they come for the land." Inside was a detailed geological map of Glenhaven. A red mark circled the western hill. It wasn't just vineyards. Beneath the soil lay a deep oil deposit, but Edward had written one final note. "Do not drill this layer. Holds a rare underground water source. Drilling will destroy the entire ecosystem." Clara exhaled softly. "You made the right choice," she whispered. Edward hadn't defied his family for money, but for the land itself, for nature, for what was right. By noon, a luxury car stopped at the gate. Elena recognized the license plate, her expression tense. "That's from Sterling Energy," she said quietly. Clara rose her coat, fluttering lightly in the wind. Two men in suits stepped out, one introducing himself as Paul Rankin, the regional director. "We heard you're the new owner of Glenhaven," he said politely, his tone dripping with insincerity. "We're very interested in purchasing the property. The offer will be generous, over $10 million paid in full." Clara looked at him steadily. "And in return, you'll drill into the ground and drain what Edward spent his life protecting." Rankin forced a thin smile. "We're simply proposing a partnership. As the wife of an engineer, surely you understand the value of energy development." "You're mistaken," Clara said softly. "I understand the value of life." The two men exchanged uneasy glances. "If you refuse," one of them said, "we can work with Mr. Thomas. He has legal rights to his brother's inheritance." Clara gave a cold smile. "He used to until he signed away those rights himself." She pulled out a copy of the agreement Edward had prepared, stamped and notarized. Rankin's face paled slightly. "You've really covered all your bases, haven't you?" "Not me," Clara replied evenly. "My husband. He knew you would come." The men left with heavy expressions. As the car disappeared down the road, Clara turned to Elena. "They won't stop." Elena nodded. "No, but you have the advantage, the truth." That afternoon, Clara carried the files upstairs and placed them neatly on the table beside the framed wedding photo of Edward. She looked into his smiling face and whispered, "They'll try to take it, but I won't let them. Not for the land, but for you." Outside, the afternoon sun stretched across the valley, the wind carrying the scent of new wine rising from the cellars below. And in that stillness, Clara knew one thing with absolute clarity. This was only the beginning of a far greater confrontation, one that would reveal the true nature of everyone involved. That afternoon, the sky over Sonoma turned a burning shade of bronze, the wind sweeping fiercely through the vineyard rows. Clara stood on the upstairs balcony, her eyes fixed on the dirt road leading to the highway. In the distance, a cloud of dust rose. 3 cars were approaching. She knew immediately. Thomas. They never gave up easily. Elena ran up the stairs, her face pale. Mrs. Clara, they're back. And they brought strangers. They look like reporters. Clara gripped the railing tightly. Good. This time there won't be any private conversations. Her smile was calm, but beneath it, her heart pounded hard. The 3 cars stopped at the gate. Thomas stepped out, his white shirt crisp and immaculate. Behind him were Victor and a man carrying a camera. Thomas gave her a practiced smile. Clara, I hope you don't mind making a small appearance for the press. The public is quite interested in the Glenhaven inheritance, and I think people deserve to hear both sides. Clara replied softly. The public doesn't care, Thomas. Only those trying to steal what isn't theirs crave attention. Thomas took a step closer, his voice lowering. Be careful. If you embarrass me in front of the media, I'll make sure you lose Glenhaven entirely. The court is reconsidering Edward's mental capacity when he purchased the estate. A posthumous psychiatric review could overturn everything. Clara was silent for a few seconds, then smiled faintly. I suppose you haven't read this morning's paper. She pulled a folded newspaper from her pocket and placed it before him. The headline read, Whitmore Corporation under investigation for tax evasion and money laundering. Thomas's face shifted slightly. What are you implying? Nothing, Clara said. I just find it ironic that a man under investigation for moral corruption would question the sanity of the dead. Victor scowled, his tone sharp. Don't play games, Clara. We have lawyers and the media on our side. You can't win. I don't need to win, she answered calmly. I just need not to lose. Elena stepped forward, holding up her phone, recording the entire exchange. Thomas noticed his expression hardening with anger. You're recording me. This is my property, Clara said firmly. I have every right to protect myself. The air tightened like a drawn wire. The wind slammed a door somewhere behind them with a loud crack. Finally, Thomas gestured for the cameraman to stop filming. He turned back to Clara, a thin smile slicing across his face. You think you can play by the rules? You have no idea what I have in my hands. Clara tilted her head slightly, her voice cold as ice. I do. Things you can't legally prove. Thomas stepped closer, so near she could smell the expensive cologne on his collar. Edward was always weak. He left you a rotten legacy, and I'll bury it along with his name. Clara met his gaze directly, her eyes, no longer those of the gentle former schoolteacher she once was. You're wrong, Thomas. He left me the truth, and I know how to use it. In that moment, Victor grabbed his brother's arm. It's not worth it, he muttered. The press is still here. Thomas shook him off, turned away, but before stepping out the door, he leaned close enough for only Clara to hear. If you won't sell, don't blame me. Accidents can happen in places as remote as this. The car pulled away, leaving a trail of dust hanging in the air. Elena trembled. They're threatening you. No, Clara replied quietly, her tone sharp as glass. They're threatening themselves. She turned back into the house, bolting the door behind her, then headed straight for the wine cellar. In the dim light, she opened the safe once more. Among the old documents, she found a new USB drive, smaller, gleaming silver. She plugged it into the computer. A video appeared on the screen, one Edward had recorded, but she had never seen. Clara, his voice came through calm and steady. If they've come back, it means they're desperate. Don't be afraid. In the folder, labeled Final, I've left all the legal records proving ownership along with internationally notarized transfer documents. They can't win unless you let go. Clara looked at her husband's face on the screen, his eyes kind but unwavering. She touched the image gently and whispered, "I won't let go, Edward. Not ever." On the hill, the wind roared stronger, carrying the scent of fermenting wine and ripened grapes. In the distance, the sun sank behind the mountains as if Sonoma itself was holding its breath in anticipation. This battle, Clara knew, would not only be fought in court, it would be a war between greed and memory, between those who had once abandoned Edward and the one woman still brave enough to stand for him. The next morning, the sky over Sonoma was impossibly clear. Sunlight streamed through the window panes, scattering across the wooden floor in glimmering streaks that looked like liquid wine. Clara sat at the library table, her laptop open before her, the folder titled Final that Edward had left already half explored. There was only one file she hadn't opened yet, the one simply named For Her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clicked it. The screen flickered to life, and Edward's voice filled the room, warm and calm, as if he were still there, somewhere close. "Clara, I know by the time you reach this part you've already fought hard, but Glenhaven isn't just land. I built it so you could be free. I knew one day they would come with promises and numbers. Don't let the worth of this place ever be measured in money." He paused for a moment, glancing toward the window as if looking out at the same vineyard beyond. "Behind the wine cellar, I built another room, a small one. It holds the things I never dared to give anyone else. Inside are the original files, the real contracts and letters I never had the chance to send. Go there when you're ready." Clara exhaled slowly. She had thought she knew everything about Edward, yet every word he spoke opened another door she hadn't known existed. She stood, took a flashlight, and went down to the cellar. The air was colder than usual. Running her hand along the stone wall, she noticed a faint crack beside a wine rack. When she pushed lightly, a section of the wall shifted, revealing a narrow passageway. The beam of light swept across the hidden space, catching a small iron door. She opened it and stepped into Edward's secret room. Inside, on a dust-covered wooden table, lay neatly arranged files and a small tin box. Clara opened it to find a bundle of letters tied with a red string. The first one was addressed to her. The opening line made her breath catch. "I dreamed of you standing in this vineyard, the light falling across your shoulders, and I could only watch. If one day you're reading these words, it means I can finally rest, knowing you're ready to continue what I could not." She gripped the paper tightly, tears falling onto the table. In that moment, every trace of fear melted away. She felt clearly that Edward had not left her with pain, but with a path to follow. Gathering all the files, she carried them upstairs. As she placed them on the table, the phone rang. It was her daughter, Laura. Her voice was hurried, uneasy. "Mom, I just got a call from Mr. Thomas. He said you're holding assets illegally, that they have proof. They want me to come to their lawyer's office this afternoon." Clara's tone was calm but firm. "You're not going anywhere." "Mom, I just want to understand what's happening. If there's a dispute, maybe we can settle it peacefully instead of Laura listen to me." Clara interrupted, her voice low and steady. "They don't want peace. They want division. And they know you're my weakness." On the other end, Laura was silent for a few seconds before whispering, "Then I won't go. But Mom, if they find another way to reach you, be careful. They seem to know more than we think." The call ended, leaving Clara with a heavier worry. Thomas was no longer relying on the media. He was trying to use Laura as part of his game. When Elena entered the room, Clara turned to her. "I need to prepare. If they're planning to strike, I'll strike first." Elena looked at her surprised. "You have a plan?" Clara nodded slightly. "I have all the evidence we need, but we won't take it to court, not yet. I want them to expose themselves." That afternoon, Clara sent an anonymous email to a local investigative journalist attaching a few carefully chosen documents. The message was brief. If you want to know the truth about the Whitmore family and what they're hiding, come to Glenhaven on Thursday morning. Everything will be revealed. Outside, the sky darkened. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the first drops of rain began to fall, carrying the scent of wet soil through the open window. Clara looked out toward the vineyard as flashes of lightning illuminated the rows of vines. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time she wasn't afraid. She spoke softly as if Edward were right beside her. "You wanted me to be strong. I will be. For both of us." The rain grew heavier, pounding against the roof like the rhythm of a war drum, the signal that the real battle was about to begin. And in Glenhaven, the widow who bore the Whitmore name was ready to make her first move, a move that would leave every man who thought he held power trembling in its wake. Rain fell through the night, the wind howling around the house as if trying to tear the windows apart. By morning, Glenhaven lay beneath a gray shroud of mist, damp and cold. Clara wrapped herself in a thick wool sweater and stepped down the front steps. She saw Elena leading the horse to the stable, her expression tight with worry. "Are you sure inviting the reporter was a good idea?" Elena asked. Thomas could turn it into a trap. Clara looked toward the hill where the fog was slowly lifting. "If they hide in darkness, I'll shine a light on it. They fear the public more than the court." At exactly 9 o'clock, an old pickup truck stopped at the gate. A middle-aged man with a camera around his neck stepped out. His face weathered his eyes sharp. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked. "Yes, I'm the one who sent the email," Clara replied. "I'm Jack Halper from the Sonoma Chronicle," he introduced himself. "I heard you have information about the Glenhaven land dispute and Whitmore Corporation's financial fraud." Clara led him inside and gestured for him to sit at the large wooden table. "Not just information," she said. "I have proof." She laid before him the documents Edward had left along with several notarized copies. Jack flipped through them quickly, his expression growing increasingly astonished. "My God," he muttered. "These are internal transactions, evidence of money laundering through their oil fund." Clara nodded. "My husband spent 3 years gathering them. He knew he couldn't expose it himself, so he left it for me. Now it's time for the world to know." Jack looked up, his tone serious. "You realize this could cause an earthquake, right? The Whitmore family has ties to politicians, banks, even the media." "All the better," Clara replied. "The more light, the less shadow can hide." As they spoke, the sound of engines rumbled outside. Elena glanced out the window, alarmed. "They're here." 3 black SUVs pulled in, tires crunching against the gravel. Leading the way was Thomas, followed by Victor and 2 strangers carrying briefcases. Clara rose, her expression calm. "Let them in." Thomas entered with a cold smile. "Clara, are you hosting a press conference? I heard there's been a leak of confidential files. I hope it wasn't you." Clara tilted her head slightly. "If you've got nothing to hide, why fear the light?" Thomas's eyes flicked toward Jack, who sat quietly taking notes, and his face paled. "The press. You're playing a dangerous game." Jack stood, his voice steady. "I'm just here to hear both sides. If you'd like to respond, I'm happy to record it." The air thickened with tension. Victor stepped forward, setting his briefcase on the table. "Mrs. Clara, this is a court-issued order allowing a temporary inspection of the property. If you interfere, you could be charged." Clara took the folder, examined it carefully, then looked up with a faint smile. "This order expired last week. You should check your dates." "Or did your lawyer forget to send you the new version?" Thomas faltered for a moment, then regained his composure. "Regardless, this isn't over." Glenhaven belongs to the Whitmore bloodline. Clara stepped closer, her voice cold but composed. And I am a Whitmore, the only one Edward chose to inherit this land. Not because of blood, but because he trusted that I wouldn't sell it as you already did once. Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but Jack raised his recorder. That sounds like a perfect headline for tomorrow's paper, he said. Thomas's face flushed red. You have no right to publish this. It's private information. No, Clara interrupted firmly. This is justice, and justice is never private. Elena opened the windows, letting the wind rush in, carrying the scent of grapes and wine through the room. Outside, birds sang faintly in the drizzle. No one said another word. Finally, Thomas turned to leave, throwing one last threat over his shoulder. You'll regret this. When the cars disappeared beyond the gate, Jack looked at Clara, equal parts admiration and concern in his eyes. You're incredibly brave, but they'll strike back. Clara smiled faintly. I know, and I have something else for you. She handed him a small hard drive. Inside is a video Edward recorded a confession from Thomas himself, admitting to embezzling company funds. If anything happens to me, release everything. Let the truth do its work. Jack took the drive, his gaze filled with respect. You have my word. As evening settled over Glenhaven, the last rays of sunlight glistened on the rain-soaked vineyard, turning it into a sea of glass. Clara sat by the window silent. She knew the storm was far from over yet. For the first time in months, she felt something new, not fear but strength. Edward had given her the weapon, and now she was learning how to wield it. In the distance, clouds draped the mountains in white, and the wind carried the scent of earth and wine to the porch. Glenhaven was no longer just an inheritance under dispute. It had become the battlefield where one woman learned to stand firm against the storm, not for wealth, but for love, honor, and the truth her husband had left behind among these endless rows of vines. Thursday morning arrived in an uncanny stillness. Glenhaven seemed to be holding its breath before the storm of news that was about to break. Sunlight pierced through the thin mist, glistening on the drops of water clinging to the grape leaves. Clara stood on the porch, gazing down the long road leading into the estate. At exactly 8 o'clock, reporter Jack Halper's car pulled up at the gate. Behind him came 2 more vehicles, one from the local television station, the other from the Whitmore family's team of lawyers. Elena appeared at the doorway, anxious. Are you sure you want to face them head-on like this? They'll turn this morning into a media war. Clara gave a faint smile, her voice calm but resolute. Then let me be the one to start it. She walked down the steps, her long coat flowing lightly in the wind. Cameras were raised the moment she appeared. Thomas and Victor stepped out of their cars, their expressions cold and guarded. Mrs. Clara, we demand that you immediately cease spreading falsified documents, Thomas declared loudly, his voice directed straight toward the cameras. Falsified, Clara replied evenly, her eyes fixed on him. If you believe that, then why fear the truth being made public? Jack raised his microphone. Mrs. Whitmore, do you have a statement regarding the accusations of corporate asset manipulation? Clara stopped, turned to face the lens, and said clearly, I only want one thing, the truth. And it will speak for me. She signaled to Elena, who brought out a sealed folder. This is a certified copy of the original contract signed by Edward Whitmore confirming that the entire Glenhaven estate is privately owned by him and not part of the corporation's assets. I also have notarized statements from 3 witnesses and bank verification documents. Mr. Thomas knows this very well. The air went still for several seconds. Thomas forced a tight smile. Those documents could easily be forged. Then let both the court and the public see them. Clara interrupted sharply, her voice slicing through the tension. Because I also have a video one where Edward himself explains his plan, including the moment you forced him to sign over a transfer. The photographers erupted in a storm of flashes. Thomas's face drained of color as he turned to signal his assistant, but it was too late. Jack had already received a copy of the USB from Elena, and the television crew was broadcasting live. Mrs. Clara Jack asked, "Are you aware that releasing this information could cause the corporation's stock value to plummet?" "I am," she answered calmly. "And I also know that justice doesn't have a stock price." Victor stepped forward, his voice trembling with fury. "You're destroying your husband's reputation." Clara met his gaze, her eyes blazing in the sunlight. "No, I'm protecting his legacy. Edward once told me, honor only matters when you have the courage to defend it, even from your own family." She turned toward the reporters. "I don't want to defeat anyone. I just want men like Thomas to stop turning legacies into merchandise. Glenhaven is not something to be sold. It's a promise my husband made, and I intend to keep it." Suddenly, Jack's phone rang. He answered quickly, then looked up, eyes wide with surprise. "Breaking news, the Board of Shareholders has just issued an emergency statement. Thomas has been suspended from his position as CEO pending an internal investigation." A ripple of shock swept through the crowd. Reporters surged toward Thomas' cameras, flashing furiously. He staggered back, his face pale. Elena whispered, "You've won." Clara shook her head gently. "Not yet. This is only the beginning." By noon, when the crowd had dispersed, Clara sat quietly by the vineyard. She removed her gloves and touched the earth lightly. The young grape clusters were growing strong, their scent mingling with the freshness of the soil. Elena brought out 2 cups of tea and placed one in front of her. "You're not going to sue them?" she asked. "No need," Clara replied. "They'll destroy themselves once the light shines long enough." She opened Edward's old notebook. Inside, in his familiar handwriting, were the words, "If you're reading this, it means the truth has begun to win." Clara closed the book and looked out toward the distant hills. The wind whispered through the vines, and the afternoon sun burned bright like fire. By evening, Glenhaven was quiet again, but inside the softly lit study, the widow sat at her desk, still writing. This time it wasn't a letter to her husband, but an article titled, "When Women Stand to Protect Their Legacy." It was not only her story, it was a message to everyone who had ever been dismissed, silenced, or stripped of their voice. Outside, the moon rose above the vineyard, casting silver light over the fields. And in Glenhaven, Clara Whitmore, the woman everyone thought had fallen, was beginning a new chapter of her life, one where power no longer came from wealth, but from truth and the pride she had finally reclaimed. That night, Clara could not sleep. Moonlight spread across the estate, glinting on the dew-covered roof tiles like a dim mirror. She sat alone in the library, surrounded by sealed folders ready to be sent out. The light from the desk lamp cast a soft glow over her face, serene, yet her eyes burned with a strange, unyielding resolve. The phone rang. On the screen appeared Laura's name. Clara hesitated for a second, then answered. "Mom," Laura's voice trembled. "I just got an email from Thomas's law office. They said I'm the secondary legal heir to Dad's estate, and they want me to sign a temporary authorization to preserve family assets." They promised a small advance payment. Clara gripped the phone tightly, her tone calm but firm. "Don't sign anything. Listen to me. If they contact you again, tell them all matters have been handled by your father's lawyer and me. They're trying to trap you." "But Mom, what if they actually file a lawsuit? I'm scared they'll use the media to smear Dad's name." Clara smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered with tears. "We don't have to be afraid anymore, my dear. Your father planned for this. The harder they strike, the steadier we must stand." She ended the call, her heart heavy but no longer shaken. The fear that once ruled her had transformed into clarity. On the desk, the laptop screen still glowed, paused at the final video Edward had left. She pressed play. Clara Edwards' voice came through gentle yet resolute. "When you reach this message, I want you to remember one thing: I believe in you. I know you won't just preserve Glenhaven, you'll make it live again. I built the foundation for its future. In the computer, you'll find the plans for the Glenhaven Green project. Use them." She opened the folder labeled Glenhaven Green. Inside were dozens of files, plans for an eco-farm revival, documentation on organic grape cultivation partnership proposals with agricultural universities. Everything was meticulous and complete, as if Edward had known this day would come and that Clara would be the one to carry it forward. The night waned. Outside, the wind carried the scent of soil and ripened grapes. Clara realized then Glenhaven was not just a legacy, it was a promise. Edward had not asked her to defend, he had asked her to build. The next morning she gathered Elena and the longtime workers of the vineyard. "We're restarting the winery," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This land will no longer be a battleground. It will become proof of what Edward believed in." A young man in the group spoke up. "But ma'am, the dispute isn't over. If the Whitmores return, they could stop production." Clara smiled. "They can't stop the sun from rising. Begin the work. Leave the legal battles to me." In the days that followed, Glenhaven came back to life. The sound of wine presses echoed through the valley, and the air was rich with the scent of fermenting grapes. Barrels were polished vines pruned, and the estate hummed with renewal. Clara worked alongside the others, no longer a widow hiding behind closed doors, but a leader guiding her land. That afternoon, as golden sunlight stretched across the hills, Jack Halper returned with his camera. "I heard you're rebuilding Glenhaven." "Yes," Clara replied, wiping grape resin from her hands. "If they thought I only knew how to protect land, they were wrong. I'm turning this place into a living legacy." Jack smiled. "The first article has caused quite a stir. Whitmore's stock has plummeted, and the investigation committee has officially reopened the case. But they still claim you forged the evidence." "Good," Clara said softly. "The louder they shout, the more people look. And light always finds its way." That night, when everyone had gone, Clara returned to the wine cellar. She poured a glass from the new batch, its red hue glowing like a heartbeat. She looked up at Edward's portrait on the wall. "Do you see Edward? They tried to destroy this place, but we're bringing it back to life." Suddenly there was a sharp knock at the door. Elena rushed in, her face pale. "Mrs. Clara." "Someone's at the gate, a woman. She says she represents the Whitmore Corporation. She wants to speak with you privately." Clara set the glass down and wiped her hands. "What's her name?" "Elise Carrington." Clara frowned slightly. The name was familiar. The Whitmore's trusted legal advisor, often called the Iron Lawyer of Finance in the papers. When Clara stepped onto the porch, Elise was already waiting tall and poised, her hair neatly tied, her eyes cold and sharp. "Mrs. Whitmore," she began, her tone as precise as steel. "I'm not here to threaten you, but to make an offer." "An offer?" Clara tilted her head slightly. "Yes, Thomas is crumbling. He's willing to surrender all his shares connected to Glenhaven in exchange for your agreement to stop releasing information to the press and withdraw your accusations." Clara looked directly into Elise's eyes, "And in return, he expects me to keep silent so he can escape his guilt." Elise hesitated. "Let's call it a way to close this chapter. You get peace, he avoids ruin. Everyone wins." Clara gave a quiet laugh, the kind that made Elise flinch. "No, Mrs. Carrington. I don't need to win. I need justice, and justice is not something you bargain for." A strong gust swept through the courtyard, scattering golden vine leaves across the ground. Elise stared at her for a moment, then said coldly, "Then you choose war." Clara stepped closer, her gaze sharp as a blade. "No, I choose the truth. War is what you brought here." Elise stood silent for a few seconds, then turned and left. The black car rolled away its tires, carving marks into the wet gravel. Clara remained standing there alone under the fading light. On the hill, the last rays of the sun poured over the vineyard, catching her silver hair until it gleamed like light itself. She knew the final battle was approaching, and this time she would not only protect Glenhaven, but defend Edward's belief that sometimes righteousness needs only one person, brave enough to stand tall while the rest of the world bows. The weather in Sonoma turned cold faster than usual. Morning fog grew thicker, carrying the damp, earthy scent of soil. Clara woke in the dim light of dawn and stepped onto the porch, where dewdrops clung to the railing like tiny crystals. She hadn't slept at all. The words of Elise Carrington still echoed in her mind. Everyone wins. A sweet offer, but it reeked of betrayal. Elena brought out a cup of coffee and set it gently on the table. "Do you think they'll really do it?" she asked quietly. "If they can't buy you with words, they'll find another way." Clara looked toward the misty hills, her voice calm. "They'll try, but we won't let Glenhaven become a hostage to greed." Around midday, as the workers were harvesting grapes, a sleek black car stopped silently at the gate. The driver, dressed in a dark suit, stepped out carrying a sealed envelope. Elena took it and brought it to the main house. "It's for you," she said softly. Clara opened it. Inside was a court order, an emergency request to suspend all production activities at Glenhaven until the ownership dispute is resolved. At the bottom was Elise Carrington's bold signature, sharp as a blade. Elena's voice trembled. "If they halt production, the entire harvest will be ruined." Clara folded the paper neatly, her tone steady. "Then we'll make them withdraw it. How with the truth." That afternoon, she called Jack Halper and asked him to come to Glenhaven. When he arrived, Clara handed him a new file. These are copies of internal emails between Thomas and Elise. Edward retrieved them from the company's server 3 years ago. Publish what's necessary, the parts proving they falsified environmental reports and used fake data to obtain drilling permits. Once the public knows, they'll back off from the lawsuit. Jack hesitated. "You realize this will unleash a real storm, don't you?" Clara looked at him firmly. "Sometimes it takes a storm for people to see who's still standing." 2 days later, the story hit the front page. Whitmore Corporation falsified environmental reports, covered up oil contamination in Sonoma. The news spread like wildfire. National media outlets picked it up. Elise Carrington was placed under investigation, and Thomas was summoned for questioning. On Tuesday morning, Clara stepped onto the porch and saw something she never expected. The corporation's legal team had withdrawn from the case. A new letter arrived, brief and final. Whitmore Corporation hereby withdraws all claims related to Glenhaven. Elena's face lit up. "We've won, Mrs. Clara. It's finally over," but Clara only smiled faintly. "No, Elena. This isn't victory. It's justice doing its work." She walked down into the vineyard, her hand brushing the dew-covered vines. The morning light spread across the valley, warm and golden. Inside her, a quiet peace began to rise. Edward had been right. The light always finds its way. That afternoon, Jack called again. "Mrs. Clara, you should prepare for a major interview. The national network wants to feature your story, the widow who took on the oil empire." Clara chuckled softly. "No, Jack. Let them tell the story of Glenhaven, not of me. I'm just the keeper of a promise." As night fell, she lit the lamps inside the winery, the glow reflecting off the oak barrels. The air was filled with the sweet, proud aroma of new wine. There, surrounded by the scent of renewal, Clara understood Glenhaven hadn't just been saved, it had been reborn. And she, the woman once seen as fragile, had become its living spirit. A light drizzle fell over the young vines at dawn. Glenhaven awoke beneath a pale glow, as if rousing from a long sleep. Clara rose early, wrapped in her robe, and stepped onto the porch, breathing in the scent of damp earth and fresh green grapes. For the first time in many months, she felt a rare peace, not the kind that comes from victory, but from acceptance. The newspapers were filled with headlines: Whitmore Corporation under full investigation. Elise Carrington had been suspended. Thomas had filed for medical leave, and Victor had vanished from the media. Public opinion rallied behind Clara, calling her the keeper of Glenhaven's soul. Yet in her heart, every word of praise only deepened her ache for Edward. That afternoon, Jack Halper arrived carrying a thick envelope. "You should see this," he said, setting it gently before her. "It's the final copy Edward sent me, but I held on to it until now. I thought you needed time." Clara opened it. Inside was a recording and a folded note. Edward's voice played soft and tender. "If you're hearing this, it means everything is finally coming to an end. I want you to know Glenhaven isn't just my apology for the years of secrecy. It's my true will, not one written on paper, but one left through action. I've created a private fund for the Green Glenhaven Project. Turn this place into a training center for young people who want to learn organic viticulture." Clara unfolded the note. It listed bank details signed by Edward, ending with a single handwritten line: "Don't let this land sleep. Let it teach others to love the earth the way you loved me." She gripped the page tightly, her eyes blurring with tears. All the months of struggle, the threats, the sleepless nights, suddenly they all made sense. They had brought her here to understand the full meaning of one word: continuation. Elena walked in carrying 2 glasses of freshly aged wine. "I haven't seen you smile this much in a long time," she said. Clara accepted the glass, gazing through the window at the valley awash in green. "Maybe it's because I can finally hear Edward's voice again, not through a screen, but through this land." Elena smiled softly. "So who will Glenhaven belong to now?" "To everyone who cherishes it," Clara replied. "We'll open classes for students, for young people who never had the chance. We'll make clean wine, preserve the soil, protect the water. It's what Edward wanted, and it's what I'll do." Later that afternoon, as golden light spilled across the hills, Laura arrived. The daughter, who had once doubted, now stood before her mother, changed steadier, wiser. "Mom," she said, "I've just been hired as the communications director for the Green Glenhaven program. I want to stay here at least for this season." Clara's voice trembled with emotion. "Your father would be so proud, Laura." "No," Laura said, smiling gently. "I think he always was. It was me who didn't understand you." They embraced, surrounded by the fragrance of grapes, the breeze, and the sun. For the first time in years, Glenhaven no longer felt like a place of the past, but one of beginnings. That night, Clara returned to the library. She opened her laptop and played Edward's final video. He sat in this very room, smiling softly. "If you're watching this, it means you did it. I never wanted you to live for me. I just wanted you to live fully." Clara touched the screen lightly. "I'm living Edward," she whispered. Outside, moonlight washed over the vineyard, shimmering like a silver sea. The vines swayed gently in the wind, whispering like a familiar voice. At Glenhaven, silence no longer carried the shape of loss. It had become a promise fulfilled. And in that stillness, Clara understood true victory was never about keeping the land, but about keeping its soul, the soul Edward had left behind for her to nurture on the soil that bore their love. The following autumn, Glenhaven had transformed. New rows of vines covered the hillsides, their yellow and red leaves blazing beneath the sun like a vast woven carpet. At the entrance stood a new sign, Glenhaven Green Center Institute of Organic Agriculture and Soil Conservation. Beneath it was the motto Clara had chosen, "From love life takes root." Locals began coming to learn, and young students from agricultural universities arrived for internships. Glenhaven was no longer a disputed estate, but a symbol of renewal, a place where the past, present, and future intertwined. That morning, Clara stood on the porch of the main house, watching groups of trainees laughing among the vines. Laura approached, holding a notebook. "We just received additional funding from the California Environmental Fund, Mom. They want to use Glenhaven as a model to expand statewide." Clara smiled softly. Edward would be so happy. It was always his dream. He didn't just dream it, Laura said with pride. He built the foundation. He was only waiting for you to finish what he started. They walked together through the vineyard, the air filled with sunlight and the scent of wine. Elena came up with news. Jack Halper wants another interview, this time for a special feature called Guardians of American Heritage. They want to tell your story and Glenhaven's. Clara paused for a moment, then nodded. "This time, I'll say yes, but not to talk about what was lost, to talk about what Glenhaven has become." The filming took place that afternoon. When the camera light blinked on, Clara stood among the golden vines, her voice soft but resonant. Sometimes legacy isn't found in wealth, but in choice. "My husband Edward chose to love the land more than profit, and I chose to believe in that even when it cost me everything. Glenhaven was once a place of loss, then a place of truth, and now it's where we plant seeds for the future." Jack asked. "Did you ever think of giving up?" Clara smiled gently, her eyes calm and bright. "Many times. But then I remembered the way he looked at me when he said, 'The truth doesn't need protection, it just needs not to be abandoned.' I only did what he taught me." When the camera stopped rolling, Jack stood quietly for a moment before saying, "You didn't just save Glenhaven, you saved the very idea of loyalty." Clara shook her head. "No, I simply learned to listen to the land. It always knows how to tell its story." That evening in her study, Clara sat alone with Edward's old laptop. She opened the unseen videos, small clips he had filmed while restoring the house, tending the vines, repairing the press. Each frame was a living memory so vivid it felt as though he were still there, walking nearby, smiling, reminding her to rest. One video paused on Edward's face as he turned toward the camera wearing that familiar, crooked smile. "If you're still here, Clara, then I know Glenhaven is alive." Her voice trembled as she whispered, "It's alive, Edward. More alive than ever." Outside, the valley glowed with honey-colored light as dusk settled. The wind swept through the vineyard, carrying a gentle rustle like a lullaby. Clara closed her eyes and felt it, the breath of the earth of wine, of memory and rebirth. In that moment, she knew Edward had never truly left. He was there in the fragrance of the grapes, in the laughter of the young students, in every row of vines she had planted. Glenhaven was no longer the place of an unfinished promise, but the living proof of a love that had triumphed over time itself. The afternoon breeze drifted gently through the vineyard, heavy with ripened grapes. The Sonoma sky was crystal clear, and sunlight poured across the valley, golden as aged wine. Clara sat at the wooden table on the porch, a steaming cup of lavender tea before her. She had just finished the final report for the funding committee of the Glenhaven Green Program, ending it with a single line. "We are not just growing grapes, we are growing hope." Elena stepped outside holding a freshly printed newspaper. "Look at this," she said, her voice bright with excitement. On the front page was the headline, "The Widow of Glenhaven, From Tragedy to a Symbol of Renewal." Beneath it was a photo of Clara teaching young students how to prune the vines, her smile radiant and steady, like the morning sun. Clara read it, then smiled faintly. "They call me a symbol. No Elena. I'm just someone who did what needed to be done." Maybe Elena replied, but sometimes the ones who never seek to be symbols become them anyway. A car appeared on the dirt road leading up to the estate. Laura stepped out, her face glowing with excitement. "Mom, the expansion plan for the center has been approved. We're going to have students from all over." Clara opened her arms and embraced her daughter, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Your father must be smiling somewhere, not just him," Laura said, smiling back. "I am too." That afternoon, they walked together through the vineyard where the sunlight filtered through the leaves, scattering into shimmering bands of gold. Clara paused before the old grapevine Edward had planted years ago. She placed her hand gently on the trunk, feeling the warmth of the earth rise through it. He once said this vine would only bear its sweetest fruit when the one tending it no longer thought of pain, but of what they could give. Laura looked at her mother, eyes glistening. "You've done that, you know?" Clara was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "Maybe he's the one who taught me how." As dusk fell, they returned to the main house. On the table, Edward's old laptop still rested its screen, faintly glowing. Clara opened the last video, the one she had never had the heart to finish. Edward's face appeared kind and gentle. "If you're hearing this, Clara, remember this Glenhaven was never meant to be a place to keep, but a place to give. When others find hope here, it means you've completed your part." Clara nodded softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. She looked out toward the vineyard where Laura was laughing with the students and whispered, "I did it, Edward, and Glenhaven will live on." The sky turned violet as the setting sun bathed the hills in fiery gold. The wind carried the scent of wine of soil and something sacred, like the quiet smile of the man who had started it all. Glenhaven was no longer an ending, but the beginning of 100 new dreams waiting to be planted. That winter, the first cold winds swept through Sonoma. In the early morning, frost covered the vineyard hills, each droplet glistening on the branches like glass. Clara stepped onto the porch, wrapping herself in the old wool scarf Edward had once given her. She looked down at the valley, now a sea of golden brown leaves, but amid the stillness of the land and sky, Glenhaven still breathed, still lived. Laura appeared with a cup of hot coffee, smiling. "Today marks 2 years since Dad passed." Clara nodded gently. "I know, but strangely, I don't feel pain anymore. Only gratitude. What will you do today? Visit every row of vines like every year." Mother and daughter walked together along the dirt path winding through the valley. Each step carried echoes of the past, the storms, the threats, the sleepless nights, and the first moment of victory. All of it now seemed like a distant whisper. At the end of the path stood a small plaque Clara had placed beneath the old vine Edward had once planted. It read simply, "Edward Whitmore, the man who planted the seeds of truth." She knelt down, laying a bundle of dried lavender on the ground, her voice soft as a prayer. "Do you see Edward? They still come to learn every week, still laugh, still dream. Glenhaven is teaching them what you always wanted to know, that life truly flourishes only when we nurture it with love." Behind her, Laura stood silently, her heart swelling with wordless admiration. This woman her mother had walked through loss, through fear, through battles fought in silence, and yet she remained gentle as the soil and strong as its roots. That afternoon, Clara returned to the main house. In the living room, the fire crackled warmly in the hearth. She opened Edward's old notebook, its final page inscribed with his words, "One day you will understand legacy is not found in what we keep, but in what we give." She closed the book, her eyes distant and calm. Now she understood. As night fell, snow began to drift softly outside. Golden light from the windows glowed against the glass, illuminating snowflakes that sparkled like stardust. Glenhaven was wrapped in silence, but not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace. Clara sat by the fire, a glass of freshly aged wine in hand, taking a slow sip. She looked up at the painting on the wall, Edward's portrait, his smile as warm as ever. "I'm still keeping our promise, Edward," she whispered. "And you know what? Glenhaven isn't ours anymore. It belongs to everyone who believes that love and truth can save a piece of land." Outside, the wind swept softly across the sleeping vineyard, carrying the scent of wine and warm earth. In the golden shimmer of the firelight, Clara smiled and closed her eyes, her heart beating in rhythm with Glenhaven's quiet breath, a place where every ending was only the beginning of something new. Thank you for listening to this story. If Clara's journey touched something in you, share your thoughts, leave a comment, like, and subscribe. Perhaps you too are on your own path to finding your very own Glenhaven.